Good times.
Hi, Alistair.
Hi, Norris. How are you doing? And hello to everybody else.
Hello, hello, everyone.
So we've got a couple. Matt was on some of I think you were on some of these calls ages ago.
This is actually my first one. I have a new job at the St. Louis Regional Chamber with innovation entrepreneurship. So I went to the conference, but have not been active.
But it's okay. Well, yeah, you had given me a new email address. We've got, let's see, we've got a nice crew here. We have, hi, Jackie. Hassan. Well, we're getting quite a crew here.
And only one of us has a camera on. Good job there, Chad.
Well, because he's the only one who's good looking of the bunch of us, so that's probably good. I'm excited. I assume Celia will be along eventually, but I'm excited to hear what Chad has to share with us. I'm sure we're going to bombard him with questions. We've got a couple of new folks. It looks like we got Simon Raby from Calgary and startup Scale Up Alberta. They're doing some marvelous things up there. I hope you'll give us can give us a little quick overview. Brennan, I don't think we've had the pleasure.
All right. Thanks for kicking us off, Norris.
Okay, the boss is here.
Oh no, please don't say that. Actually, okay. The only boss is like behind me, right? So if you can see my screen, there's a lot of Bruce Springsteen pictures.
Yeah. Well, at least we're not as old as he is, but okay, sure. You are our fearless guide.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that we're all. I'm just really happy to see everybody here. I am slowly getting over this thing, so hopefully my voice will come back. But thank you all for joining us. We're going to put in that dreaded popcorn question to get to know each other a little bit earlier, or just a little bit more. And I don't know, do you have a good, I feel like there should be an interesting popcorn question. We talked about holiday foods for a long time, and it made me really hungry. So since we got past the first holiday hurdle, at least for some of us, I'm gonna start with a going on holiday question. Okay, so just to get to know you a little bit better, we understand that everybody on this call is interested in practical metrics and methods, but I want to know a little bit about you. So as we popcorn and call on each other, the question will be, where are you planning on going on vacation, or where would you like to go on vacation as the new year comes up? So I'm going to tag Eric.
Hey, let's see. I've got a bookstore behind me. I think I don't have anything special planned. I think we're just going to hang around New Mexico. We're very happy with that. But in the interest of making Cecilia happy, maybe we'll check out Tent Rocks or some other kind of national monument kind of thing, some white sands or some other kind of very visual, very picturesque kind of thing. So I'll go with that. You know what? I have been sort of chatting or something, slacking or whatever with Stacy. So I'm giving you a warning, Stacy. I am going to popcorn it over to you, Stacy Williams.
Hello. Hey, Eric. How's it going? And everybody else? Hello? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Fantastic. So I will most likely be spending the holidays bouncing from Virginia to North Carolina to South Carolina to see family. That's what I did this last week, and that's probably what I'll do again this next round. All right. Let's see. Who's next? How about Jackie?
Oh, hi. Thank you. And sorry, I can't seem to get my video going or the computer audio. It works on Skype, but for some reason, I don't know, something with Zoom is not quite working. In any event, okay, so, gee, you know what? I never plan that far in advance. I just find it so, I couldn't even tell you what I'm going to do this weekend. So New Year, wow. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions, I suppose. So I'll listen to everybody else's. So I'm going to popcorn over to, let's see, Norris. I think he's there.
Oh, I am here. I'm scribbling down all the names on the participant side. We're up to 16 now. Could be going for a new record. Right now it appears I will be doing a down home Christmas right here in Boise. We always seem to get snow on Christmas Eve here. And now I'm seeing a very strange picture of Alexander. We are going to teach him to use a laptop. But impoverished graduate students are somewhat deprived. I'm planning to see what it's like to not travel on Christmas. Since the Mars expedition hasn't booted up yet, I think I'll stay here. And in fact, since I picked on Alexander, I will kick it to him. The question is, what marvelous thing are you going to do for the holidays? You could turn.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay, so well, for the holidays, I plan to go for an international student conference in Atlanta, and so that happens every year, and it's called Bridges International Vision Conference. So you get to meet a lot of people, and it's fun, and New Year's Eve party and stuff like that.
Oh, so pass it on to somebody on the list.
Matt Manietti.
You're muted, Matt.
I pass it on to Matt Manietti.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted there. Excited to meet you all and learn a little bit more about priority area number 5. I planning on at least 2 trips right now. Next year, I'll be going to Cancun with my wife and some friends of ours that live in Boston now. So excited for that. All inclusive. And we'll be going to Zion National Park in October to do some hiking and sightseeing. Popcorn. I see our Darcella also from St. Louis on the call, so I'll popcorn Darcella.
Hello, how's everybody going? So I am not going to go anywhere. I've been doing way too much travel with National Veteran Small Business Week. I don't want to see the inside of a car or a plane or a train. So I'm just going to sit at home and clean my basement. Let's see, I will send it over to, I don't think we heard from, did we hear from Cecilia? There you go.
Nope,
then.
not yet. Well, thank you. So I am planning a big trip with my son, who I haven't seen for 17 plus months now, since he graduated and started to live overseas and has been globetrotting around, and currently not too far from Chad in Australia. So my son and I are going to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Singapore for the holidays. So that's what I'm going to do. Alistair, what will you be doing?
I have no idea. So I have no plans at all yet. We'll see what happens probably with my daughter and her family who live in Northern Virginia. I think the second part of your question was, where would you like to go on holiday? I'd like to go to Edinburgh, Scotland, because the Scots make a big deal out of New Year. Lots of good food and haggis and whiskey.
You were so close. You killed us at haggis. Go ahead and pick on somebody, Alistair.
And Suresh?
Hey, I don't know if you can see me, but I'm joining the meeting for the first time, and my good friend Norris Kruger has been sending me these reminders, and I am interested. I'm sorry, the question is just about where you want to go on the vacation?
Yeah. Do you have any plans for vacation, or where do you plan on? Where would you like?
Yes, I have plans. I have a 10-year-old, so Disney World is where, unfortunately, we end up. So a couple of days there and maybe a couple of days in Miami is the plan as of now. I'm looking forward to this meeting and contributing from a perspective of some of my students who are working on building the ecosystem in the city of Newark, New Jersey. So that's where my immediate application is of the Group 5 goals. Thank you.
Can you call on somebody, Suresh? Or haven't gone yet?
Alistair Brett.
Oh, I think Alistair went.
Okay. Then you have Alexander Rohan.
No, he's gone.
All right. So shall I?
Way to go, Suresh.
How about Norris Kruger?
I already went too.
Okay, all right.
How about Samantha?
There you go.
Where are you, Sam? I don't think I see her right now. Kristen, you're off mute. Why don't we go with you?
Hi, my name is Kristen Slice. Can you guys hear me? I had my headset muted, so are we still good?
Yes.
All right. So my name is Kristen Slice. I actually work with Arizona State University on their entrepreneurship and innovation team. I'm leading a program out in the city of Peoria doing entrepreneurial ecosystem building out in the West Valley. So very rarely do I get to actually give that title. So it's kind of interesting to be able to say that on this call, which is cool. I have been interested in this, attended the last ESHIP summit, but haven't been able to regularly attend the meetings. In fact, I got to jump off here, but I'm desperately trying to catch up with conversation and be part of it. A large piece of our grant is measuring metrics and what does that look like, so I'm excited for that. Not too much to report. I live in Phoenix, so when it comes to the holidays, everyone comes to me, which is relatively easy to do. So get to enjoy the weather here in Phoenix. That's about it.
Great. And somebody you can call on.
That's what I wasn't sure who hasn't gone per the list.
So Michael Meeks, Eric, who else?
Michael Meeks, go ahead.
There you go. Wow, Michael's just going to type stuff in. So Michael's at Park City and called on Beth.
Hey, I'm sorry.
Do we lose you, Beth?
Forward. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am looking forward to going to my favorite island, Isla Mujeres, that's about 22-minute ferry ride off of Cancun. And that will be in late March or early April. And did Michael Meeks already go?
Yes, he's the one that called on you, but we'll call on Eric.
I've already gone, and I was taking some notes, so I don't quite remember either. Did we hear from Brennan or Jackie?
Yeah, we've heard from Jackie, so Brennan, it's your turn.
There we go. This is Brennan Townley. Thanks. I'm catching up as well here. I'm going to be flying into Norris's beautiful hometown of Boise, Idaho, and then driving 3 hours with my screaming children to visit my in-laws in the middle of nowhere, Idaho. So I might stop at Norris's house and get a drink before I hit the road. Let's see. Simon.
You are a brave man, sir. Are you going to Sun Valley?
Rupert, Idaho. So no Sun Valley this trip.
Well, make sure you check out Chobani.
Will do.
Thanks a lot, Brennan. This is Simon speaking from Calgary, Alberta. 4 degrees here, lovely and sunny. As you can probably tell, I'm not from the area of Calgary. I'm originally British. And where am I going to be going on Christmas? So it's my wife's mother's 60th birthday. So we're going on our first cruise. Never been on one before. Looking forward to it. Hopefully no one throws a family member overboard, that we all get on swimmingly well. So that should be good fun. But yeah, we're going to spend some time down in Santa Monica, LA, and then we have our cruise out of LA around Mexico. So looking forward to that and getting some sun on our bones. But I will pass over to Chad.
All right, thanks. So I think I'm going to holiday in Australia, which is quite nice. Probably just a couple hours down the Sunshine Coast, the Gold Coast, a few hops here and there, but probably stay close to home. Hassan, have you gone yet? Hassan?
We got you on mute, Hassan.
Can't hear you, Hassan. Is your volume up?
I can hop in. Oh, okay. Go for it, Hassan.
Can you hear me, Chad?
I can. Good go, man.
Cool. Sorry, I had to call in. For some reason, I'm having some tech difficulties with my computer, so I had to call in. The question was where I'm going on vacation.
Yeah, for Christmas.
Planning on going to Hawaii, actually.
Nice.
Nice, great. And we've got Eliza and Alexandra left.
Cool. So this is Eliza. It's been a while since I've been on a call, but I work at Forward Cities with Stacy and Eric. So we will be going to Indiana, where my in-laws are, and be doing a lot of hanging out and relaxing in very flat land. And if I were to have a dream vacation, it would be somewhere in Mexico. And I'll hop it over to Alexandra.
Yep, it's hard to hear you. And if you'd like, you could type in your answer if that's any easier. So part of the reason, I know that it's hard and challenging to introduce people on calls, and part of the reason that we do this is so you get used to hearing from each other and maybe not being such strangers on a call. So we wanted to give the opportunity to to see that you're not just about metrics and methods. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you for joining us. We host a monthly call in where we focus on an aspect of whatever the goal is centered around. In this case, it's around metrics and methods. As we brought this community together starting in 2017 with the Kauffman Foundation, convening 450 ecosystem builders, trying to figure out how we build a field of ecosystem building and identifying that this goal is an integral part of that framework. So thank you again for being on the call. My name is Cecilia Wessinger, and I'm the community activator focused on ecosystem building practitioners, such as yourselves, working in custom bespoke ways. I don't want to take up any more of the time. I want to turn it over to Chad, who's going to share some things out of Australia. I didn't know if Norris or Eric had an intro for Chad.
Chad's awesome.
Okay. I think that's
really exciting. He's got some really exciting stuff, and I think we're gonna. It may even top Alistair's talk last time.
Oh, well, so we're not going to be that competitive, are we? So Chad Renando is the managing director for the Global Entrepreneurship Network in Australia. And I had the pleasure of meeting Chad at several ESHIP summits and in Global Entrepreneurship Congress. So he will go ahead and share. And we'll turn it over to you, Chad.
Excellent. Thanks, Cecilia. And hello, everyone. Absolute pleasure and honor to be here chatting with you guys. Just for a bit of a background, I am from Seattle, originally been in Australia for about 20 years, and bounced around between manufacturing, digital, a few other things, bit of consultancy, ended up running an innovation hub back around 2017, and did that for about 18 months. As I did that, it was a local government model, so funded by the local government here in Australia. Of course, I started measuring and built a little platform to help measure, but realized that there's a gap in the market on how we measure the things that we do in the entrepreneur ecosystem. And then went over to the first ESHIP summit, started meeting with other like-minded individuals, realizing this was a bit of a global challenge. And so that's prompted me to look a little bit more into this. I've built a platform to help hubs and measure their impact over time, which I'll share a bit more on. And now I'm currently working, I have a foot in two different camps. One of them is in building collaborative bodies, particularly in regional areas, non-metro areas, to support entrepreneur activity. And the second one is within data. So, and at the federal level, as a nation, how do we measure entrepreneurial impact? But then how do we collect the data at the local level and bridging that gap? So as an overview today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk briefly about why measure, what we measure. I'm probably not going to spend too much time on what we measure, but we can get into that depending on how the questions go, because I know that's one of the big things that people often ask. I'm going to focus a lot on how we measure and different platforms and systems there are to do that. And then we might pause, and I go in a few different directions, show you some outcomes from hubs that I've been working with, as well as some insights into the platform that I built. This is one example, of which there are many. So I'll get into it by sharing a screen. And can everybody see that okay? Am I on? Just somebody give me a shout out if that works.
Yes.
Awesome. Yep. What I'll do, let me, hang on just a sec, sorry, do that. Just a sec. There we go. Alright, so as mentioned before, three big things come up with measurement. Why we measure in the first place, what to measure, how to measure. The why question is really nice. It's just a business case behind it. One of the things I realized is that the innovation ecosystem actors is a distressed business model. Most innovation hubs.
Hang on one second. Can everybody put themselves on mute who's not Chad? So, so that would be great. I'm going to try to mute everybody. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat screen so that we can share that. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Innovation ecosystems is a distressed business model. You can run it, particularly when we talk about innovation hubs as a concept, you can run a co-working space really skinny on 0.7 to 1.2 full-time employees, and then pay for the physical asset of the land, and then get a fee for service on the desk hire. But as soon as you start adding in entrepreneurial programming, that has an additional cost, of which that cost needs to be supplemented in some way for an outcome. But that operates at a deficit, which means it needs to be subsidized. What I found is that quite often people don't have the resources and the sophistication to measure, which means any funding they got the first time around, they don't get a second cut at it because they don't report very well, which means they don't have the resources to hire to be able to measure. And it creates a bit of a vicious cycle. As compared to, if I have the means to measure, that means I'm able to justify what I did and get additional rounds of funding wherever that comes from, which creates a virtuous cycle. And so what we're trying to do is create a virtuous cycle through the measurement. So often I do frame this as place-based economic diversification, which is both a combination of economic development and community development outcomes. To be able to frame it that way, to be able to justify to people, why is it that we're doing this thing? We are creating jobs, but we're also building capacity and resilience in the region, and resilience being the particular area where I focus on. When we talk about resilience, there's three different ways we can think about it. One of them is bringing us back to where we were in the first place, which we know isn't necessarily right. The other one is moving from one state of what they call equilibrium to another. And the third way is this constant ability to transform and change and adapt. And really that's what we're after by a lot of the work that we do, to be able to diversify what we do in regions, to be able to get new business models in. It's really making the case. And these activities are typically funded from one of 5 different sources, whether it's government. In Australia, we've got the 3 levels: federal, state, and local. And there's probably usually some representation of that in most nations. University, corporations, investors, and philanthropic. The point on this one is that quite often we look to one particular entity, and quite often I know in Australia we look to government to help fund these things, but each one of these has different value propositions. So government wants economic diversification, they want economic and community outcomes, and ideally so they get voted in next time so they can prove they're creating jobs and helping people. Universities want, attraction of new students, justification of their funding, commercialization of R&D. Corporates want new research and development and increased market share. Investors want return on investment of whatever they're doing. And philanthropic wants the good and the outcomes for whatever it is that they're particularly focused at. And so there's a multiple funding model where we try and give everyone a little bit of everything. And so that then drives into what we measure. But measurement is a bit of a challenge. There's some good research they did around the different principles for enhancing innovation ecosystems. The challenge with this is if these are our principles on how we make decisions, then how do we measure these as outcomes? How do we measure diversity and redundancy of resources, particularly in regional areas? Connectivity is a big one, the speed of those connections. The culture around learning and experimentation and being okay to fail, which is quite often countercultural to the major institutions and establishment. Participation and activity, what they call polycentric governance systems, or the multiple ways of governance, which then actually adds complexity to measurement because everybody has their own different ways of measuring. As we heard in the last meetup, complex adaptive systems, and how do we get the understanding out there and measure that impact? And finally, this is a slow work that we're talking about. I mean, ecosystems can take decades to build up, an overnight success 20 years in the making. So what are the variables that we need that'll eventually create those jobs? There's some good research out of Germany where they showed that the impact of an entrepreneur of a new business is actually negative on the community for the first 1 or 2 years because that new business is trying to learn what they're doing. They're not immediately going to create jobs overnight, which is challenging if you're operating on, 3 to 5 year election cycles. How do we justify what we just did? Quite often we don't see the outcomes until well past that's invested in that location. So we'll then get into, so what can we measure? And I'm just going to go through a few slides briefly on different frameworks and models. There's one that looks at the input, the process that you do, and the output is a common way of looking at things. This is a bit of research they did around university innovation hubs, where they looked at technology transfer, activity, connectivity, both physical, digital, social, growth in numbers. And so there's a broad range of metrics that we can borrow from there, and I'm happy to share these slides so we can pull these apart. Kauffman Foundation did some really good stuff around density, fluidity, connectivity, and diversity. And this, you start understanding that we're getting into not just measuring the impact of the actual actors in the ecosystem, such as how much investment or how many events did I run, but then how do we measure that surrounding aspect as well? So are we bringing new people and new diverse type people into our region through immigration? What are we seeing as far as inflows and outflows to our region? I know when I was running my innovation hub in Ipswich, which is about an hour outside of the city inland, we were having people move to our region to be a part of our innovation framework. This is a compelling argument for people to actually move there because they know what they kind of get excited about what's happening there. Creates a bit of a buzz, and so that can have an outcome, but it's going to be challenging to determine what's causal in that. The Aspen Institute, this is a bit of an older one back in 2013, but again, they have these questions against the pillars on how we measure the different indicators. And again, the sheer volume of these ones just speaks to the complexity of what we're trying to work with here. From finance to measuring the policy implications, the actual underlying infrastructure. And some of these are measurement, and some of them is just an understanding of what that current state is. And finally, the Regional Entrepreneurship and Development Index, or READY. And this one's quite interesting because they talk about attitudes, aspirations, and abilities, but then they have both individual variables and what they call institutional variables within the different metrics. So for example, on startup skills, where you look at it, you can say, how many of the people claim to possess the skills to start a business? And you can collect that just simply through a survey. Do you feel you have what you need to start a business? And there's a few survey models out there that do these kind of things, or the risk acceptance. Would fear of starting a business stop me from proceeding, or questions along those lines? But then partnering those up with some of the institutional barriers that may contribute to that person thinking that, such as transparency or corruption in the local community. And so for practitioners out there looking to really invest in how they do these things, it's a matter of going through and saying, well, which ones are relevant to our community and which ones do we want to start off with? And the final point on there is, how do we connect these to community? The additional complexity here is that it's actually even more of a challenge than traditional business, which quite often is just the P&L, profit and loss. Am I making money or not? Revenue and cost. That's incredibly simple compared to what we're trying to do, because we're actually trying to affect a community as well. And so I've done some mapping around what are the economic development indicators. So for this example, I did READY, and then how do we compare those to the community indicators, such as the built in the natural environment, or the different demographics, or the homelessness, or the poverty? Because really those are the things that we're trying to do. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that innovation in itself is morally neutral. It doesn't have an inherent good or bad, and we can create innovation ecosystems, as we've seen in some regions, that actually increase the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. And so how do we point this stuff that we're doing to the benefit the community overall, not just a few? So these are some of the challenges. So I'm going to touch briefly now on how we measure. And there's different approaches out there, such as surveys, business insight platforms, mapping and data platforms, regional analytics and research and government data, and then approaches to integrate those overall. So on surveys, globally, there's two main ones that are out there, which is the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor and Startup Genome, which take a look at a region overall. GEM operates typically at the nation level. It is it's what they call strata based, where it's just randomized. They call random people on the phone. Sometimes they do online. In Australia, we've got a 10,000 sample for the nation, where we call people up and ask them a series of questions. And that's really good at getting what they call the nascent entrepreneurs. It's not necessarily focused specifically on what we term as startups or innovation-driven entrepreneurship, but it is just anybody who's thinking about starting a business, and then we test some of the innovation components within that. And that's really good in that it's been going for a couple of decades now, and really research-based, a lot of journal articles looking into female entrepreneurships. They can point at social entrepreneurship. Each country can kind of add a few questions and modify slightly, but it is fairly comparable across regions. And then you have Startup Genome. Startup Genome is very specific, as per the name, to startups, and it goes at a city basis. And that's really good at comparing cities, but they're also really good at just unpacking the strength of the city and saying, well, what makes you good? In Australia, we're running it in Sydney and Melbourne and exploring other big metro areas. I'm also talking with them on what that would look like for a nation. They do a few metro cities in the States. Downside is not necessarily scalable then to some of the regional areas, which kind of leaves us on our own doing it. But again, I know they're trying to focus on that. But we can look at some of their surveys and say, well, how do we adapt that for what we're trying to do? There's other surveys that do just for accelerators or incubators. And then just briefly in Australia, we have Startup Muster that was around, but isn't continuing at a nation level. But then you typically also have surveys that operate out of your Bureau of Statistics, whatever you might have in your region. We got a couple of ones that run here in Australia, Business Characteristics Survey, which runs annually, and the Venture Capital and Later Stage Private Equity surveys that go out. Again, plus side of surveys, you're able to get a broad audience. Downside is we have to question, is it testing people who take surveys, or is it testing my population? Second, we have these business insight platforms. So under the platforms themselves, obviously Crunchbase, CB Insights are some of the big ones out there, integrating for things like Owler and whatnot. Again, pros and cons. Crunchbase has a really big pool of data, more accurate in denser areas. When I did an analysis for Australia back in 17, I had about a 20% error rate. So especially when you start getting down to some of the regional areas, some of the early stage stuff that isn't incentivized to put on the platforms, it can be a bit of a challenge. And you also have platforms that do additional features. MetaBeta is a new one emerging out of San Francisco that does specific to hubs to measure their impact. And so that's good. Then you have things like Gust, AngelList, whether it's investment or AngelList focusing a bit on jobs, F6S, which focuses a bit on accelerator programs, applications, things like that. Again, it is a source of data, but it's only a data source for people who have incentive to use those platforms. Then we get into mapping and data platforms, and this is an emerging field really popping up over the last 5 years or so. For commercial national ones that I've seen that I would rate, look, you've got Deal Room and Startup Nation Central are two of the bigger ones. Deal Room is going city or region by region. They can get to the city level. I've seen populations as low as 70,000 on the platform. And so I'm really interested to see where they're going with it. Startup Nation in Israel is also scaling out. They're in New Zealand and a couple of locations. They do offer it, but you do have to provide the resources and go over to Israel, get trained for it. But I do believe it's either low to no cost to be able to set that up. But you do have to resource up there, actively looking for partners. Hockey Stick, big fan of what they're doing up there. And it's a model very similar to what Startup Status is, where they send surveys out, the survey data comes in, focusing specifically on hubs, and that data then can be aggregated and de-identified or anonymized out. So I do like what Ray and those guys are doing up there. We're also seeing Startup Blink come up. I'm cautious on that one in that it is very much, they really emphasize ranking, not a lot of visibility into the methodology. And they did big announcements on this country is now bigger than this one, this city's more active than this one, but there's not really justification underneath. And it's mostly focused on activity, not really getting the underlying aspects to it. And just briefly over in Europe, we're seeing some things come up there, which are interesting, but again, that's specific to Europe. SourceLink, really love what they're doing to be able to go into a region level. And I know there's a few people within the communities that are using that. Tech London and Gus did a partnership over there with IBM that's specific to one area. You can map your ecosystem through the Startup Ecosystem Canvas through Founder Institute. And so they've got something where you can just quickly plop some stuff in and get it up there, and a couple other platforms as well. And then Australia, we've got Decode Systems, which is doing some mapping here. Startup Status, which is my platform, which I've mapped about 1,600 actors in the Australian ecosystem with a survey component attached to measure hubs over time. And then Sydney has Ramen Life, Melbourne has Laneways, and a few other specific ones. And then you have regional analytics research. This is the platforms that go out there and just combine government data and a few other things to put it together so we can get insights into those. And then finally, you have government data. And really that's the rich source, but the challenge is how do we tap into that? Because here in Australia, we have the business longitudinal analysis data environment, or BLADES, where they pull in things like intellectual property data and investment data and business registrations and employment reporting. Now, obviously, privacy and sensitivity is absolutely critical, and there's a whole bunch of criteria on that platform where they won't give you a data set if it's under a certain number, so that you can't necessarily identify them. So it's pretty sophisticated, but they are opening it up so you can get data sets from that and then combine them with yours to get some rich information. I think this is the way we need to go at national levels to be able to tap into that. And so then we talk about integration. And so as practitioners, where do we go next? This can seem big and overwhelming, but I guess the encouragement is there are platforms out there that are helping us do what we do at a regional level. SourceLink, Dealroom, Startup Nation, Hockey Stick, and on a commercial basis, getting the funding to help support that. And then at a specific hub level, whether it's Startup Status or Hockey Stick can help in that area, Metabeta, to be able to help with the individual hub actors. And then supplementing that with some things like Startup Genome or our own bespoke surveys. So that's a brief overview of platforms. What I'm going to do now, just for briefly 5 minutes, I'm going to show you some outcomes of hubs that we've gone into. Show you briefly FireStation, which is the one that started me on this whole journey, just to give you a bit of an insight there. Some of the things we're measuring, obviously just the sheer number of entrepreneurs that we're working with. I did have a bit of focus on social enterprise. You can look at gender splits and other kind of things to say, are we capturing all of the community? What kind of investment types people are getting, the total investment committed, like people like those top line numbers and jobs, same thing, even though they are very lag measures, and also what stage or people are at. So just a very crude dashboard. And this is also to show you it doesn't have to be as sophisticated. It's just me and Excel and PowerPoint trying to hack stuff together. I look at business models because if we are talking innovation, economic diversification, and it depends on where we sit as far as traditional businesses, service-based, we need those. But then really getting people to things that can scale, so platforms or products or programs, marketplaces, SaaS things. And this will determine your mix and your focus on what is their business model. And also the sector, are we really diversifying? And again, if I'm working in a population of 600 or 6,000 in a region that may be heavily agricultural or resource-based, this will change a bit, but are we looking at maybe other things in the supply chain? Just a sheer wall of logos is always helpful to show and say, look, we are having a lot of different people come through. So I like to report on those. One of the questions I do like to ask is, what are 3 words to describe your experience as an entrepreneur over the last 12 months with my organization, what that looks like? What that does is it gives you the culture. If you ask that question, put in 3 words across 20 people, you will start getting some words that pop up. And so it's a really simple way to measure what is the culture, what effect am I having on the people that we're supporting. I asked the question very broadly on a scale of 1 to 5. Am I helping you realize your goals specific to the area I'm trying to impact? And then why did you answer the way that you did? And then theme that out. People, and quite often it's surprising. So for us, we spent all this money on our facility, but people actually rated some aspect of the facility, such as being open or the coffee or whatever, is fairly low. There was a lot around community and mentors and their personal growth. And even the workshops weren't as important as just that sense of community in a regional area. And then we just go in some of the details and responses. I'll just blow through these real quick in that it's important to also tell the story. So it's quantitative metrics, hard data, graphs, charts are always great. And then here's Peter, and let me tell you about Pete. And here's Katerina with her dog food business that she started in her home, and now she's scaling to Singapore. And so these kind of narratives are as critical because they create the priming agents for people to say, I connect with that. You know, we want to affect both the heart and the head in these kind of narratives. And Lex, who started out just a bit of an interest in virtual reality, and now he's engaging with the largest car dealership for the world's first virtual reality car launch. So those kind of narratives are absolutely critical. Just some more tech stuff. And I'll briefly get into another one that we did, just specific to one slide I want to show. You know, please rate. Why did he say that? Primary industry, logos. What year were you established? How would you best describe your role in the business? Are we getting the founders? What stage would you say you're at? But the one I want to show you are the areas of social impact that we talk about. Where do you need support in? This one. So we asked, what are your staffing levels and what will your staffing levels be this year and next year? This one's interesting. Everybody talks about employment, but I do break down employment or staffing based on this year, next year. And I also do full-time, part-time, contract, and volunteer. And I do local, in my state, in my nation, and global. Because this tells us, are we impacting our local economy? Because one of the risks being is that we can affect all this change, but we get criticism that all the jobs are going offshore. What we found, though, in this particular case, population of about 150,000, I think, in their local area, is that you had, for example, one person who was employing 32 people, and next year they were planning on employing 2, and 30 people were going offshore. But the surrounding community that was around that was building up. So in every aspect and every indicator, we were increasing overall, and that's because of the network effect. And so even though we want to create these priming agents of these individuals, we want to measure, well, how are we doing overall within our community? And what you often see is with this innovation hub, innovation type focus, it does have a network effect of scale as your service-based business and your cafes and everything else grows around these, what they call the innovation-driven entrepreneurs or the high-growth entrepreneurs. And then the last one I'll show you for about 2 minutes is just an approach on looking at a taxonomy. Again, I have, the reason I created this platform is because I saw a gap in the market on a low cost effective way to go into hubs and measure their impact. And so this is the platform that we have, which has a dashboard where you can send out surveys. Those survey results come back. You can see a dashboard of the results of your constituents. But then your funding body gets a login where they can see a de-identified aggregate view. And so therefore we never have to spend the 2 or 3 days a month doing our board reports and things like that. It said, look, mate, you got to log in. You have any questions, just let me know. Shows where they're at in the country, what their business models are, what their employment growth is, things like that. This is the main one I just want to share, is just the taxonomy of keeping track. You know, you have an individual who has a role in an organization. They then are a member in a hub, and those individuals or organizations can participate in an intake, and those intakes are part of a program. And that program can be a part of a hub, and the intake can operate in a different hub. And so as we look through and say, why is it so hard to measure? Well, this is kind of why, because the taxonomy it's not complex, but it can seem a bit complicated. And then as a collection over a region, then we're responsible for multiple hubs. And I use the term hub loosely as a chamber of commerce or a co-working space, anyone who has a responsibility for a portfolio of entrepreneurs. And so then we can look at data we collect at each of those objects or those actors, the hub, the individual, the organization, the program, the intake, tags, and then what I call snapshot data. So there's data that we have about me, you know, my gender, my age, things that are largely unchanging, and then things that are changing more rapidly, such as employment or location or revenue, investment, those kind of things. Be able to keep track of those. And then when we onboard, we can say, well, what's the simple things we need at first? Don't try and grab everything. And we also have to build up that trust and also give people that we serve a reason for the pain. You said this, did you know that 30% of the people that have virtual reality in their business eat oats for breakfast? We can ask simple things, which then start rewarding them a little bit for why they're giving us the information to build that trust, and so they get what's in it for me. I'm going to pause there because I'm seeing the chat thing light up. And I'm going to turn it over to questions so we can have a bit more of a yarn about this. I'll stop share, and there we go.
Well, Chad, I'm sorry you didn't bring us any useful information. That was awesome. I know it's tough to do this when you don't have you can't eyeball the audience. Got a couple questions in the queue already. Just go ahead, and the first one appears to be Dr. Kumar. Suresh says, great stuff. How do we simplify it to make it digestible for a local government or institute?
Yeah,
make it simple enough that politicians can understand it.
Yeah. And so what I just shared was very much around for practitioners. For the politicians, it is around economic diversification and creating new types of jobs. And so it's taking them on the journey, saying, look, here's the economic profile of your region, and here's the economic profile of my hub or my constituents or the people I'm working with. Here's the job profile type of the region, and here's the kind of the people that I'm working with. And here's how many people are going to be hiring within my particular area as compared to the total population. And so those kind of comparison numbers to say, here's the impact we're having. You gave me $20,000 for 12 months in order to do what I do. I did these activities, I engaged these participants, and here's what they think they're going to do next year. And so it's using the data to tell them, take them on a journey, and then immediately after put it on with, and by the way, here's Joanne in grade 12 who now wants to stay in the region, and she's running this local community cafe business. So put it with the data, tell the story of the individual. This person's going to vote in the near future, and so therefore I want 20 grand again next year.
Yeah, it's good getting the data and in simple form, in their language, but having the story as well. Matt had a question, more fundamental. How are you are defining startup? Because finding what you touched on that with Jem looks at nascency. There is not as simple a definition as we'd like. So how do you define it, and how do you explain that?
Yeah, I've actually got a pretty simple one. Do you have potential for rapid growth? Can you get customers outside of your region? Are you using innovation or something new in your business in some way? Really, that's it. And what that does, it excludes the traditional cafe, maybe the local mechanic. We absolutely need those. But I'll show you another slide just briefly, which talks about the pipeline. In a lot of literature, they talk about the 4 different types of business, where you've got your survival type business. Look, I just need to get cash in to get it going. I've got a lifestyle business, feeds me and my family, a few local customers. Maybe I'm exporting a few things. Then you have managed growth, where I'm starting to scale, which means I need to get some people outside my region engaged in what I do, maybe online, and then high growth potential. And what we typically talk about as a startup, by the technical definition, is these high growth potential businesses. And the way I test in Australia is, who's your customer in Connecticut? Simply because Connecticut's sufficiently not local for them to challenge their business model. It's all around the business model.
Great, thanks. Mike Meeks he wants to know about everybody's favorite radio station, WII-FM. What's in it for me? What's your pitch to get buy-in from the most important local players?
Yeah, and it really is what's in it for them. So, you know, your local chamber of commerce, we're going to be able to share membership, share programming, work together in order to attract investment. Chamber is for all business. We are specific to new forms of business. I had a local chamber say to me, Chad, what are you for my 350 members? I said, mate, not much, but for your 20 members that want to scale globally, we're probably all they have because there's not a lot of other options in there. It's a specialist skill set. It really is adjusting that Wi-Fi channel for whoever that entity is. Universities, we will engage your students in new forms of thinking, extracurricular type activity. High schools, we're going to be able to get students engaged in entrepreneurial type programs. Parents who can also be investors, we're going to give your young people opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise. Otherwise, they're going to have to go to Silicon Valley or things like that. But we can actually start that process here. Local government, we're going to help develop new forms of business, help establish businesses with new ways of thinking. Quite often people forget about the established businesses. When those businesses already know how to adult in the business world, they can already profit and loss, they can already do their taxes. And sometimes all it takes is for a new way of thinking. The local home developer whose son came back into the company with a bit of virtual reality experience, next thing you know, 3 years later, they've developed this virtual reality home specification unit that creates the quote in VR as you're creating your home. So those kind of narratives to help engage different aspects of the community. It's just having your pitch adjustable for whoever it is. It's not one size fits all. I see Dave says, I look at education channels as long tail success of the innovation community. I focus more on the existing founders building. Is there one more important? That really is a challenge in that there's just so much to do in what we talk about. You know, engaging in high schools, building my investment community. This is why I'm such a fan, and I have a foot in both camps of both the data to help support and also these backbone organizations which can help support overarching within the community, because it's just too much for any one actor. There's so many times you go into regional areas, that one hub trying to do everything, when we need the government university, if there's some representation there, or a local community college, the local high net worths, all focused around supporting these activities. Because then we can start getting, for example, here in Ipswich, our angel group is then creating partnering with an education company to then drive entrepreneur programs in the dozen or so local high schools. They're doing that because they want to engage the parents within those high schools to potentially be investors, create the pipeline, and nothing brings people around like a bunch of young people pitching. At the same time as they're going to be running investor roundtables to help educate and build those up. And then partnering with very specific aspects in the community, such as we have a local cafe that's really focusing on health, to get them on board with maybe some health tech startups. So it is taking a portfolio approach, but I'd also recommend, and then this goes back to the data, is focusing on your strengths. That's one of the things that came out of the Genome Report in 2018, is if you have scarce resources, you have to focus it in specific areas. So pick your 2 or 3 focus areas. Don't try and be all things to all people, but say, in my region, how do I just shout the data points and the opportunities that exist here and don't exist anywhere else? And how do we find those must-win battles, those big challenges that we can be known for? You know, is it a local Shakespearean theater where I can run IoT on actors in a play? Is it a particular animal species or something like that where we can really focus on a part of ecology or ecotourism, or what is that one thing we can be known for?
Great. That seems to be a rising tide in the U.S. is switching from how do we remediate our needs, or do we double down on our strengths? And it seems that the latter is advantageous. We have a couple. We have Dave Barkos. Where are you from?
I am Vancouver, Washington, just outside of Portland, Oregon, about 15 minutes.
Great. Well, welcome aboard. And Alexandra from Skopje, Macedonia. How are you? How are you, Alexandra?
I'm fine.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
we'll figure out how we can turn you into the queen of entrepreneurship for the Balkans.
Yeah, I actually wanted to thank Chad for the good remark about finding this to specialize and not focus on overall on everything. I think that's the way we should do it also in the Balkans, and consider that's the path to kind of grow entrepreneurial into ecosystem in the Balkans. Thanks, Chad, for that remark. I would think of that in the future.
You're welcome.
Anybody else want to chime in? We only got like a minute and a half left.
Yeah, just before they do, I'll also touch base on Michael Meek's question real quick on bandwidth. Again, this is where forming that extra body overall, how do we get everybody going in the same direction? You know, I often talk about either the zombie apocalypse or the asteroid coming to get us. You know, is it a fire under our bum or a fire in our heart? Either one can work, but what is the one thing we can get behind? Often it's not entrepreneurship, economic diversification, jobs, those are okay, but a bit mundane, but fundamentally transforming our region for X, you know, being the world leader in renewables, being you know, it's getting everybody on board towards that outcome. And then how do we get to that outcome? That's really the opportunity here.
That's a great
yeah,
note.
I'll open up.
Great note to end on. This has been astonishing. I hate for this thing to end, but we've only got about another minute. Our next week or next month, I hope we'll all be back. Chad, you will have the deck will be available, and this hour will have been recorded. Balto Loikkanen from Finland has volunteered for next month. And sorry, he's not here, but we've had about 25 people on and off on this call. If I missed anybody who was a latecomer, sorry, but thank you all for coming. I don't want to be competitive, but we've had 25 people, Celia. Is that a record yet?
It is definitely a record. You guys keep setting records, so I appreciate you.
Well, we've got people like Chad and Alistair. How can we go wrong?
It's true. So, so what I wanted to also share is in the email that you got on this phone call, there is a link to the dashboard. So when the video is available, this video will be uploaded to the dashboard. Also on the dashboard, it's a way to join the Slack channel where you can continue with these ongoing conversations and you don't have to wait for another month before you continue the conversation. So thank you all for your time. Chad, you're a trooper because I know it's like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning for you. So thank you dearly for doing that. Thank you all for including your energy and being involved in this. And we will wish you all a happy holidays and look forward to more engagement. So take care. Have a great day.
See you guys. Thanks heaps.
You guys are awesome.